Welcome back to our lecture. The next service I want to talk about is the EC2 Autoscaling service. Autoscaling is a feature that is made available to us by EC2, and it allows us to automate the scaling of EC2 instances. It allows us to ensure that a certain number of instances are running at any given time. So, for example, we can specify that we want 10 EC2 instances to always be running within our account. And if one of those instances were to fail, then the EC2 Autoscaling service would automatically start up a new EC2 instance to replace the instance which had failed. We can also use autoscaling to elastically increase or decrease the number of EC2 instances running in our account based on the amount of demand from our customers. So if we have a web platform that requires, let's say, normally requires only 10 EC2 instances, and that platform receives much more demand than normal. Let's say there's like a spike in activity and more customers than usual are accessing our site. It could be something like a Black Friday event where we have a sudden spike in activity and orders on our e-commerce site. Well, EC2 Autoscaling could detect that increased demand in activity on our site and then automatically launch more EC2 instances to handle the increase in demand. And then conversely, when the demand on our site diminishes over time, then EC2 can automatically terminate EC2 instances so that the amount of computing capacity that's available better aligns with the amount of demand on our platform. Now, it doesn't cost anything to run EC2 Autoscaling, and you just simply pay for the number of EC2 instances which are created by the Autoscaling service. You don't pay for the service itself. Now, when you're configuring EC2 Autoscaling, there are two different components that you have to configure. One is what we call the launch configuration. And the launch configuration is essentially like a template that describes and specifies all of the different EC2 instance configuration values. Essentially, you're defining what type of EC2 instance the autoscaling service will create when it launches new EC2 instances. And the process for creating a launch configuration, as you'll see in the hands-on segment, it's very similar to the process you go through when you're launching a new EC2 instance. But in this case, you're not going to actually launch an instance. You're just specifying the configuration which should be used by this autoscaling service when it launches EC2 instances in the future. The second configuration component is the autoscaling group. And the autoscaling group basically defines and specifies how the autoscaling service will actually scale the EC2 instances. It defines all the conditions which determines the number of EC2 instances that should be running in your account. And there are sort of two different ways to do that. One is to specify a set number of EC2 instances which should be running at all times. And the second is to define a set of rules which will determine when more EC2 instances need to be added and when EC2 instances need to be removed from your environment. When you are configuring the auto-scaling group configurations, as I said, you can specify that you want to maintain a minimum number of instances. You can set up dynamic scaling, so instances are going to be launched and removed based on CloudWatch alarms. You can also manually scale instances using auto-scaling. And so that just involves going into the auto-scaling group configuration and manually adjusting how many instances should be running. And if the current number of instances does not match the number of desired instances, which you specify in the auto-scaling group configuration, then the auto-scaling group service will automatically adjust the running instance count to match your desired configuration.